who is going to be returning from the original Lord of the Rings for the Hunt for Gollum? If you're not aware, the Hunt for Gollum is a story that's before the events of the Fellowship of the Ring. It's before the events of the Fellowship of the Ring, and that's kind of important because there's a lot of stuff that happens, but it's not on screen. There's a lot of stuff that happens that's important, but is left out of the early 2000s Jackson trilogy, and also wasn't delved into in the Hobbit movies. But that means also that there's going to have to be a lot of characters that come with it, right? There's going to have to be a lot of characters from the original trilogy if they want it to be a continuation or just an addition to both the Hobbits and the Lord of the Rings movies that Peter Jackson created. So obviously the first thing is Peter Jackson is involved with this one. He's not going to be directing it, though. He directed all 6 movies with the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well as the Hobbit trilogy. But this is not going to be directed. He's going to be producing this. I believe he's also going to be helping with the writing at least the development of the story. But Andy Serkis, the guy who plays Gollum, actually, in the Hobbit and in the Lord of the Rings movies, he has been getting into doing a lot of directing the past decade or so. So he's going to be directing this. This is sort of a continuation of the Jackson films, the Jackson Middle-earth films, but it's going to be directed by Andy Serkis. The good thing is he's been involved along the whole way, and so I find that there's some hope there, all right? And it's not just Jackson, and it's not just Serkis. You also have a couple other people that worked on all 6 films as well. You got Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, all right? And they're actually going to be involved a lot to help craft this story as well, in the same way that they helped with the original trilogy. And they're kind of the people that, the adaptation to the screen was a very hard task. A lot of people prior to the Jackson trilogy said that this is an unadaptable book. You can't make this into a movie, and then they did it. And so it was a real big success and everyone was surprised by it. But you really have to thank people like Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. So the behind the scenes individuals, they're going to be involved with this as well, which is good news. The kind of weird thing that's happened is when they finished The Hobbit, like Peter Jackson and all them, they tried to do a franchise called Mortal Engines, and it kind of failed in a big way. And so there's a lot of people, especially also with the Hobbit trilogy, there was a lot of people that felt like it wasn't as good as the original. And so you come into this and you're asking yourself, can I expect this next continuation Middle-earth movie to be any good? All right. And I'm going to be talking about this later in the live stream as well. But although I'm not the biggest fan of Andy Serkis's directed films, like, the Venom movies, I don't think they're that great. I am holding out hope because I wouldn't say there's anything that they've done that's absolutely horrible. And when I look at the Hobbit movies, I have notes. I definitely have notes. But if you go and actually watch them, yeah, there's too much story there than what was necessary. There was a whole lot of film, 3 movies for 1 book, and there's a lot of stuff that they pulled from the events of Middle-earth and added to that story, added to specifically The Hobbit, especially the side quest with the necromancer and all that. That is in the books. However, it wasn't accounted for in the Hobbit book. And so it was like there was a lot of adding to it. So here's the thing. Going into this movie, The Hunt for Gollum, I am going into it with Hobbit quality expectations. And if they fulfill that, maybe with a little bit less animation, maybe some more practicals would be nice. If they give us something that is similar to that quality, then I'll be happy. All right. And if they do justice to the same level that they did justice to The Hobbit, which for some people felt like was not much. Some people felt like it was a complete disaster for an adaptation compared to the original Jackson trilogy. I would say they didn't contradict the book. And that's what's important is you look at the Hobbit movies, they didn't contradict it. So let's look at who else might be involved. But first, let's actually see who said they're not going to be involved for sure. So Hugo Weaving recently came out and said that he will not be involved with this. He was actually involved with the Mortal Engine movie that didn't work. And he also just said, like, I think he's a bit tired of being in New Zealand for a long time. I think there's also an element to where he's like really concerned with how old he's getting and how old he looks. And maybe there's an underlying reason. He basically just says he's worried about how old he looks compared to the character he's supposed to be playing, Elrond, who's an immortal being. And so he's like, I don't think I have no interest in being in this movie. All right. Which you could, out of a lot of the characters, Elrond could be a good fit, but it looks like they might not try to fit him into the story primarily because he doesn't want to be in it. And I think recasting would be a bigger issue than trying to just take him out of the story. So Hugo Weaving, he's not going to be in The Hunt for Gollum. All right, another character, John Rhys Davis. All right. He said he has not seriously considered it, but he does have a condition if he's going to return. And I don't know if it's necessary that Gimli is in The Hunt for Gollum, but they have speculated, a lot of fans and Warner Brothers themselves has said, we want to do more Middle-earth films, Middle-earth movies for theatrical release. And so there might be consideration of saying, well, maybe we do need people and actors like John Rhys Davis to come back and play his character like Gimli, even if it's not in The Hunt for Gollum, which we did get confirmation that The Hunt for Gollum is going to be one movie, not two. Okay. When they say more Lord of the Rings movies, they're talking about other stories, Hunt for Gollum being one movie, and then they'll tell probably more Middle-earth films, most likely in the Third Age. Warner Brothers is kind of sticking to the Third Age right now. So there's going to be more movies, but Hunt for Gollum's only one. And John Rhys Davis's, this is what he had to say. All right. So he's got one condition. Well, I'm known to not want to put that prosthetic on again. So he's talking about, if you guys don't know, all of the prosthetics he had to wear on his face to make him look like Gimli. He had a really bad reaction to it. I think he was allergic to something. And so he was constantly broken out in a rash at the end of every day, like filming. His face was just red and swollen because of the stuff they had to use to put on his prosthetics. So, but out of deference to Andy, whom I love and admire, and again, who has grown so much, if they invite me, and then he says, could I dare to put on the makeup again and lose my skin? Maybe with CGI. So he's saying, I really don't want to do the prosthetic again to play my character Gimli. Before, when they asked me to do The Hobbit, for instance, I said no, not at all. Times have moved on and technology has moved on. If I don't have to spend 8 hours a day for 3 years of my life in a makeup chair, I might indeed do it. The other thing is physically, I'm no longer capable of putting 80 pounds of extra armor and stuff on and climbing up mountains. So if he returns, he's going to have some limitations, and that's understandable. However, I don't think he's going to be in the Hunt for Gollum. So we got Hugo Weaving, no. Gimli, I don't think they are going to try to fit him into the Hunt for Gollum. However, what everyone has been talking about is Gandalf. Gandalf is in. He's a big part of the Hunt for Gollum story. Is Sir Ian McKellen going to be coming back? And I actually did a video about this where he expressed interest. He expressed interest in coming back. He says, we're playing around with a number of ideas, but most of these ideas do not include Gandalf, Boyan said. So Gandalf would potentially return for 2 live-action films. So it's potentially past the Hunt for Gollum. But what did Sir Ian McKellen have to say? He opened up to return as Gandalf so long as his age didn't catch up to him. Basically, he was saying things like, look, I'm willing to, but if they're going to do it, they better hurry, right? He said, I'm getting old, and I'm getting quite old. And if they want me to return as Gandalf, they're going to have to hurry up. I think there's a very strong chance, of course, hopefully, that he doesn't have an accident or he doesn't, pass away or something like that before he doesn't get sick. I know he recently had an issue on stage where he had an accident that really frightened him while acting. But it seems like Sir Ian McKellen is positioned to come back and play Gandalf. That's really good news because he does, even if it's a smaller role in the Hunt for Gollum, it's very important, I think, to the fan base to see him come back, to see him return, and to actually act his character Gandalf. I think that's really important. Then we have other characters like, Orlando Bloom. Let's see what he had to say in this video. In the Middle-earth Updates YouTube channel, there was a little video towards the end of this one where it gave a quote of what Orlando had to say. Let's watch this.
Says, feel free to give us a follow there. But next up, we actually have another character in the mix for the new Hunt for Gollum movie, because Orlando Bloom was asked by Variety if he was interested in returning to the Tolkien franchise. And he said the following: "Oh man, those things are amazing. Yeah, I don't know how they do it. I guess with AI you can do anything these days. But if Pete says jump, I say how high. I mean, he started my whole career. I really don't know what they are planning, but I did speak to Andy and he did say that they were thinking about how to do things. And I was like, how would that even work? And he was like, well, AI. And I was like, oh, okay. It was a pretty magical time in my life, and it's one of those things where there's not a downside to it."
All right, so it sounds like Orlando Bloom is open 100% to come back and play in more Lord of the Rings movies. I don't know if they're going to try to fit him into the Hunt for Gollum. Very possibly. But what's interesting is that he actually talked to Andy Serkis, and he's the director. He's kind of the one that's heading this project. And so if Andy Serkis is saying, well, AI, it sounds like they're going to be doing a ton of AI type tech, using a lot of AI technology for this movie. So that could mean, de-aging Gandalf some if Ian McKellen comes back. De-aging, people like Orlando Bloom, right? De-aging everybody, potentially even Gimli, John Rhys Davis, if he's going to not have to wear his makeup, maybe they could use on some level AI and animation to not have to do all that. So it sounds like they might be bringing in a lot of people, or at least interested. If they're all talking to Andy Serkis, it means word is getting around, and with the original cast and crew, and they're considering a lot of different options that are here, right? And I think Warner Brothers is also trying to be like, hey, tap the original actors. Tap them. Let's see if we could try to spark a little bit of fan service magic. And that's kind of a studio thing. I'm not going to be happy if they have to do a bunch of recasting, but at the same time, it's kind of like, what's going to be best for the story? Do we bring in actors as Easter eggs just for like joy? I don't know. Maybe not. But let's see what else they had to say. There is one thing that they are waiting on, one very important character, not Gandalf. We already talked about him.
Would been asked to be in the movie or not. But Andy is clearly reaching out to all of the old actors to see if they are interested in playing the role, and it also makes sense that he does this maybe before planning out the script, as the script could vastly change depending on if the old actors are returning or not.
Yeah, so they're going to craft the script based on who's in and who's not, which is interesting because in the interview with Ian McKellen, he said that they are going to have a script ready for him to consider early next year. So in just a couple months. That could be an issue. Either they are fully on board with saying Gandalf's going to be in this movie, whether he plays him or not. It's hard to say. I think Gandalf's an important character. You can't just ignore him in the Hunt for Gollum. So maybe they're going to write in Gandalf, and then they're going to coax Ian McKellen to come back. But let's see who else is like the important character for this.
More and more actors are popping up, and now I think it's just a waiting game until we hear something from Viggo Mortensen too, as Aragorn would most likely be one of the main characters in a storyline set around the Hunt for Gollum.
This is this is like the glaring problem here, and maybe this is why Andy Serkis is thinking about AI in such a big way. Viggo, Aragorn, he is like the character that you can't not have. It's like him and Gandalf and Gollum. Like you can't not have Aragorn, and it would be catastrophic to recast Aragorn. I think it would be catastrophic to recast Aragorn from Viggo. However, Viggo is considerably older. Considerably older. He didn't come back for The Hobbit at all, which makes sense. But for the Hunt for Gollum, like it's absolutely necessary, I would say. And they don't have a green light with him yet. And it's going to be so interesting to see what they do. If he's thinking about AI, that means like almost, it's very possible that they're maybe at Weta, they're setting up some kind of technology to make it very basic de-aging. All right. So hopefully it is not noticeable when you see it. And I don't even know how you would go about that, because sometimes if you start playing around with stuff, you get into the uncanny valley. But if they have to like de-age a majority of these actors, if it's not dialed in, then it's going to come off. It's going to come off very poorly. So, and I haven't seen it done with animation before, not with real human faces, in a way that makes you fully convinced. I know the Here movie just came out with Tom Hanks and I'm spacing on her name. They were in Forrest Gump together. I know they did like a lot of de-aging stuff with them, and I haven't heard or seen it outside of the trailer. The trailer looks okay. I just don't know exactly what's going to come of this. A lot of dynamic cinematography. It's really hard to say what's going to come of this movie. You have to have Viggo. Like you have to have Viggo. You can't get around that. So I guess we have to keep our ear to the ground and see, do they get him? I think the last movie I watched was like 17 Lives or something. It was about him as like a scuba diver rescue team. But yeah, I'm just thinking with everybody that needs or possibly should come back for the Hunt from Gollum from the original Lord of the Rings cast, Viggo, you can't get around it. It's like, why make the movie if he's not coming back? And that's really important. And I do remember him doing an interview where he was asked about it. I think this is like a year ago. And he said, I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody. I don't know if they'll have me or something. That's basically, and he was concerned about his age as well. And that's reasonable. And so they might be building out technology using AI for de-aging that is not seen by the market yet. It wouldn't surprise me if Weta is doing that. At the same time, thinking through the script on what can we have and what we can't. If AI de-aging technology works really well, then can we get all the original actors, and are they willing to come back, and how many of them are going to come back? And that allows us to expand our story accordingly.